He eventually decided the only way to prove he was right was to infect himself, develop the ulcers and cure himself. Who was crazy until they were right all along? Ludwig Boltzmann. His equations and formulas explained the physical properties of matter, but as it went against the then accepted laws of physics, he was ridiculed and ignored for years while fighting for atom theory to be accepted. He took his own life just 3 years before Ernest Rutherford discovered the nucleus of an atom, proving Boltzmann's theory. In the days of landlines. My phone was tapped. I could hear a strange hollow sound and I knew someone was listening. I had had a bad accident and was home for almost a year and involved in a lawsuit. I told my attorney about it. He told me the insurance company wouldn't bother. I mentioned it to my roommate. She told me I was crazy. I began to notice a van parked on my street. It was there for several days. I thought I was under surveillance. My attorney and my roommate said I was crazy. A person came to my door asking questions about the neighborhood. They claimed to be from a real estate company. They didn't go to other houses. I thought I was being watched. My attorney and my roommate said I was crazy. Several weeks later, my roommate's boyfriend was arrested for stealing physical and intellectual property from IBM. It was the beginning of the tech era and he stole millions in hardware and software and ideas. We were being watched to see if we were involved. The phone was tapped. We were under surveillance. We were taped. I wasn't crazy after all. Hemingway. Before he took his life he became extremely paranoid. The FBI was following him. His wife and people around him just thought he was mentally ill and grew deeply concerned. Hemingway went as far as getting electrotherapy at a psychiatric hospital to try and help with the perceived delusions. Turns out the FBI had been following and bugging him for years according to declassified files. J. Harlan Bretz. He was a geologist that in the 1920s came up with a theory about why the dry falls and surrounding scablands of eastern Washington state were so sharp and abrupt, instead of smooth as should be, with a general understanding of erosion. Especially since the falls have no real river to speak of to create erosion. His theory was that a giant flood, created by an even more massive lake, ripped through the region millions of years ago, reshaping the landscape in a matter of days. He was laughed at and discredited in the geology community for almost 50 years. Until someone discovered evidence in the 1950s of an ancient and massive lake that started just north of Montana that stretched all the way to southern Utah. The lake was believed to have been created by glacial dams, ice walls, during the last ice age. It would fill up over thousands of years and then hit a point where a glacial dam broke and the lake water would fire out the break like a water cannon, drain the lake, and reshape an entire region over several days as the water flowed toward the ocean. This happened several times. Since the flood that carved the dry falls likely started from the Lake Missoula area in modern-day Montana, it was named the Great Missoula Flood. Bretz was given an award in 1979 for his contribution to geology when he was 96 years old. He joked, "All my enemies are dead, so I have no one to gloat over." Edit. Fixed name. Edit 2. Oh my goodness everyone, thanks for all the upvotes and awards. I had no idea this would turn into such a popular post. The dingo ate my baby. Lady. Got made fun of constantly, most notably in Seinfeld, and I believe went to jail because nobody believed her. Turns out a dingo ate her baby. She is still made fun of. For a very long time the medical community thought that stomach ulcers were caused by stress. A doctor in Australia called Barry Marshall claimed they were wrong and that they were caused by an excess of certain bacteria, and the cure was simple antibiotics. The medical community ridiculed him and nearly ended his career. He eventually decided the only way to prove he was right was to infect himself, develop the ulcers and cure himself. In curing himself he was proved right and won the Nobel Prize for his efforts, and now stomach ulcers are very easily treatable. They previously affected 1 in 10 people. Full story here. Harry Markopolos spent 10 years trying to convince everyone, investors, journalists, regulatory agencies, etc., that Bernie Madoff was a fraud, based on forensic accounting. Madoff was one of the most respected names on Wall Street, and despite the overwhelming evidence, no one was willing to entertain the thought he might be running a Ponzi scheme. Harry's book, No One Would Listen, is a pretty great account of financial detective work and just the abject frustration of being absolutely certain you're right, but no one believes you. In 1912, the meteorologist Alfred Wegener described what he called continental drift, an idea that culminated 50 years later in the modern theory of plate tectonics. Wegener expanded his theory in his 1915 book The Origin of Continents and Oceans. Starting from the idea, also expressed by his forerunners, that the present continents once formed a single landmass, later called Pangaea, Wegener suggested that these separated and drifted apart, likening them to icebergs of low-density granite floating on a sea of denser basalt. Supporting evidence for the idea came from the dovetailing outlines of South America's east coast and Africa's west coast, and from the matching of the rock formations along these edges. Confirmation of their previous contiguous nature also came from the fossil plants Glossopteris and Ganodermopteris, and the therapsid mammal-like reptile Lystrosaurus, all widely distributed over South America, Africa, Antarctica, India, and Australia. The evidence for such an erstwhile joining of these continents was patent to field geologists working in the southern hemisphere. The South African Alex du Toit put together a mass of such information in his 1937 publication Our Wandering Continents, and went further than Wegener in recognizing the strong links between the Gondwana fragments. Wegener's work was initially not widely accepted, in part due to a lack of detailed evidence. The Earth might have a solid crust and mantle and a liquid core, but there seemed to be no way that portions of the crust could move around. Distinguished scientists, such as Harold Jeffreys and Charles Scutchard, were outspoken critics of continental drift. When the Civil War broke out, everyone on both sides thought it would be a quick victory. However, Sherman kept saying it would be a bloodbath that would drag on for years. His superiors decided he was insane and sent him out west to fight Indians, Native Americans, just to get rid of him. After it all came true and they needed some better generals, they said maybe we should bring back that Sherman guy. Johnny Rotten said in an interview that he knew Jimmy Savile was into all kinds of seediness. People dismissed it as typical Johnny Rotten anti-establishment talk, for which he is famous. As it turned out, he was right. Martha Mitchell, she was the wife of Nixon's AG, John Mitchell. She was outspoken in the extreme and was one of the first to talk openly about what really happened with Watergate. Since she was also known to love her martinis, she was widely written off as a drunk, crazy woman. Behind the scenes, a White House doctor began heavily sedating her and her husband locked her away from the press. No one believed her until Nixon resigned and the story came out. To this day, most people only remember her as that loudmouth, Martha Mitchell. Michael Burry. The first guy to predict the 2008 housing market crash. He was a hedge fund manager for Scion Capital at the time and basically bet his entire fund's liquidity, all the money the fund had, that there would be a crash. No one believed him except a few other people who also bet against the market. Several of his clients sued him for tying their money up in what they considered to be a foolish bet, all to have him be right in the end. He made his fund something like $1.3 billion and the value increased about 489%. The movie The Big Short is about him and a few other people who were wise enough to bet against the market at the time. I've watched the movie like 5 times in order to try to understand exactly what happened but still don't fully get it. I recommend it to anyone who's interested. Fun fact, Michael Burry was also ahead of the curve in the recent GameStop surge. I think he had something like 1.2 million shares of GameStop months before the price shot up. Might need to fact check myself. Edit, spell check. Me. About my, now disowned, cousin. He kept stealing things from me which my family felt was no big deal. But it escalated. It went from stealing candy, to my things, to cash, and after that I asked them how much longer they would support him and call me selfish for not sharing. The line was finally crossed when he stole our grandmother's credit cards and her car. She finally wrote him off. This was after he had stolen all of her jewelry, including the last anniversary ring, my grandfather was ever to give her. Oh, but he tried to say that our family kicked him out because he's gay. No. None of us cared about that, it was because he's a thief. His friends have bailed him out of jail and then dropped him when he steals from them. But he claims the world is just unfair to him. Now he tells his pity story and milks to my family disowned me because I'm gay to everyone he begs from. I learned this when he tried to do it to one of my friends. Sinead O'Connor. Younger Redditors might not know who she is, but she was a singer, songwriter from Ireland who was a staple in the alternative music scene during the late 80s and early to mid-90s, who had some crossover hits. Anyway, at the height of her popularity she was the musical guest on Saturday Night Live after cancelling an earlier scheduled spot in protest against the guest host, which was some dumb SS stand-up comic from the 80s called Andrew Dice Clay. As Scott Thompson described him, it's as if someone took your grandmother, the one who can't speak English, and taught her to swear phonetically, gave her a special on HBO and made her a star. During her performance she sang an a cappella version of Bob Marley's War, changing the lyrics to make it about child sexual abuse instead of racism. At the end of the performance she shouted something like "Fight the real enemy" and dripped up a picture of the Pope. In the following weeks people lost their SHT, and on the next episode of Saturday Night Live they had at least 3 sketches that tore her apart. A few years later the Catholic sex abuse scandal broke internationally. The doctor who found COVID in China and was silenced and died in prison from COVID. My wife who never liked my mom's husband. He apparently made a pass at her before we were married and I just wrote it off as Bob being Bob because it was honestly semi-innocent and at the time he and my mom were newlyweds. But over the years we started finding out he was hitting my mother, he fondled my sister, he was constantly cheating on my mom, he got caught trying to take an upskirt picture of my friend's underage sister, and he punched my mom in the head outside in the ice, causing her to hit her head on the pavement, fracturing her skull and causing an almost fatal brain hemorrhage. She needed 2 brain surgeries and now deals with balance issues and almost complete loss of taste and smell and hearing in 1 ear. He has never faced any consequences for anything because for reasons I can't quite understand the local law enforcement in their podunk town takes his side every time she calls the cops on him. One time they even took her to jail because his drunk SS fell in the walk-in pantry while they were having an argument and he called the cops and said she beat him up. He's literally twice her size. Thank you for watching the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more quality content. Leave a comment if you have any suggestions. Goodbye.